Thank you, Heiko. So back for more is NWAC's own Simon Trautman to talk to us a little bit about persistent slabs. That was supposed to be him.
All right, thanks. Before I get going, I want to thank Heiko for that. I think that the medical side of things has been ignored. Not ignored, but it's been secondary to what we focused on in avalanche education or in our discussions for a long time. And the one thing I'd add to the idea of pulling it in a more prominent fashion is that we tend to, avalanches are sensational, they're beautiful, they're dangerous, they do all these things that capture our imagination, so we tend to focus on them. But they're not the whole safety picture, right? There's a lot of things that we do that are very dangerous, and quite frankly, the risk of like our binding breaking on a top of a steep pitch, or me driving a snowmobile into a tree is pretty great. Maybe sometimes even greater than getting caught in an avalanche. So medicine's important, emergency medicine's important, and thanks, Heiko, appreciate it. All right, switching gears. I'm not up here to tell you guys about Washington's snowpack. I think there's probably a lot of people in this room that have more experience here than I do. And what I hope is that this talk will be a simple illustration and that those people will agree with what I have to say. I've bounced around the West quite a bit, working on snow and avalanche issues a variety of ways. And I've noticed kind of an interesting thing, at least to me it seems that a lot of the times we tend to overgeneralize the importance or maybe the control that geography has on avalanche risk management. An old oversimplified example of what I'm talking about would be to say that Colorado snowpacks are weak or Washington snowpacks are strong. So while each of those things might be true at the 30,000 foot level, grand scheme of things, if you apply that description to a specific instance or a specific day, they can be very wrong, right? We know that Washington snowpacks aren't always strong, or even if they are strong, they may have a weakness in them that can be very dangerous. So, let's see if we can bring this together. So what are we going to do? We're going to have a quick overview of terminology. We'll look at climates a little bit, and we'll talk about some typical scenarios that can create persistent avalanche problems in the Northwest, or anywhere for that matter. And we'll take a really, really basic view of avalanche incidents and accidents over the last 20 years. What's that? So, a facet. Does anybody in here raise your hand if you don't know what a facet is, and it's okay if you do not? Awesome, so we have a couple people. So a facet is simply just a grain of snow. It's not magic. They are beautiful, but what you're looking at here is, this is the faceted part of the grain, or the crystal, and this is a rounded part. This part is growing off of that part. There's several types of these. This particular one is a facet that grew within the snowpack. This is a more advanced form. This is called depth hoar. And this is another advanced form. This is called surface hoar, and it was deposited on the surface of the snowpack. So basically, in the wintertime, this is just dew. But the way that when dew is deposited in the winter, it freezes in a very specific geometric pattern, and it creates these really beautiful feathers. So three main types: surface hoar, depth hoar, and inner snowpack facets. So what? Why is that important? It's important because sometimes faceted snow can be much weaker than the snow around it or the rounded snow. And if you end up having a scenario, this one is very dramatic. They're not always this easy to see, but that's pretty obvious, right? That just looks unstable, okay? It's not always that simple. But this day was amazing. You could, you could dig holes and the crystals would just fall out of the pit wall. It was quite dramatic. But, so the point is that when we get this weak snow, this faceted snow, and it gets covered or weighted by additional snow or a slab, then we can have these instabilities. And those instabilities can last for a long time, which is why we call them persistent. So we have a persistent weak layer, which is some sort, generally some sort of faceted layer. It doesn't always have to be facets. Sometimes it can be wet grains. Sometimes it could maybe be an ice lens or a crust, although generally facets are associated with those. But most of the time, what we're worried about are faceted layers at an interface. So you have the persistent weak layer, and then you have the persistent slab. So the reason this is important is that persistent weak layers by themselves just aren't that, they're not dangerous, right? The only way that they become dangerous is if you put that piece of snow on top of them that can be triggered and that can fall on us, okay? Okay, how many people in here have heard of avalanche climates or snow climates? A lot. Awesome. So if you have specific questions on this, Pascal's sitting up front. Actually, in all honesty, Pascal and forgetting the other name on the paper. This most recent one. And Chandro just last year published a really great paper, and if you're interested in this stuff, look it up. It's good. It kind of took the whole idea of avalanche climates to another level. But the important thing is in general, the idea is that we have three main climate zones, and that those climate zones show specific characteristics based on avalanching. So we have a maritime zone that happens along the coast. We've got a transitional, or in this picture it's called intermountain zone, that kind of happens in the middle, and then we've got your continental zone that happens further inland. And the idea is the maritime zone is relatively warmer, it's cloudy, heavy snowpack, a lot of precipitation, snowpack with few weak layers and lots of avalanching immediately during and after a storm. Whereas the continental side, further inland, would be colder, clear skies, less snowfall, thinner and weaker snowpack, and avalanching related primarily, or a lot of the time, to those persistent grains that we talked about a minute ago. And then the transitional area, of course, would be something in between. So that makes sense, right? It's pretty simple, and we all see that. Like, it's wet out here, and it's cloudy out here, and half the time you can't see. But does it matter? Which climate's more dangerous? Does anybody, what do you think? Who thinks that one of those climates is more dangerous? If you take the bear issue out, no bears. No wolverines. Then we'd have to, Utah would be just totally out of luck. All right. It's more complicated than just saying one is more dangerous than the other, right? It kind of depends on how you define danger. But in the end, and most generally, it's better not to generalize. I think There's a couple reasons for this. This isn't a map of the way it is. It's not a map of the way it will be. I think, you know, for example, it's possible to have transitional periods in maritime climates, and it's possible to have maritime periods in transitional climates, right? We know that climate and weather move throughout the year or throughout many years. There's cycles. The other thing we know is that we can have very different snowpack structures and avalanche patterns within the same designation on the same year. Does that make sense? So for example, we know that in a transitional climate zone, say from northern Montana down to, actually, the point is, I'm going to go to the next slide. There's a lot of real estate in Washington, just like there's a lot of real estate all across the West and up through Canada and throughout the world. And making this broad categorization is really important because it allows us to think about these things, and it allows us to classify, it allows us to understand. More importantly, it allows us to discuss what we're seeing. But if we start believing that it's black and white or believing that that's the way it is, we can create a fallacy, and we can end up in a spot where we make this jump in logic that doesn't play out on the ground, such as this. Maritime doesn't mean a safe snowpack and no weak layers. It does mean a stronger snowpack relatively and fewer weak layers relatively to, say, a continental snowpack. But these two things aren't the same, and even though this is incredibly obvious, it's also incredibly important. So, is there a recipe for persistent problems, whether it's in the Northwest or anywhere? And in my opinion, the answer is yes, of course there is. Anybody got an idea? I can think of two right off the top of my head.
Cold, clear nights on the crest of the Cascades.
Absolutely, cold, clear nights. And why is that? Yep, we create these temperature differentials, and we can create those facets, right? What else?
Early season snowfall that persists on earth-facing storms.
Absolutely. Early season, thin snowpacks, and why are thin snowpacks important? Yep, you have higher temperature gradients if you have a thin snowpack, right? Because there's less insulation between the ground cover and the air. So, you guys nailed it. I'm done. But yeah, we end up, you know, we don't always have that, right? We have a lot of that around here. Thick snowpacks, cloudy skies, warm temperatures, really fun. But early season, we can have things that look just like this all over the place. That more closely resemble, you know, southern Idaho or south central Montana than they do, you know, the west slope of the Cascades. And as you guys said, we have this. Doesn't always happen, but it does happen, and it's magic. And, you know, when we have these days, it's an incredible time to be outside. It's also potentially building those weak layers. And if those weak layers are built, and then you get a little bit more snow or a lot more snow, you end up with that unstable situation. So here's a really quick look at avalanche incidents since 1998. This is not rigorous. This is done pretty quickly over the last couple days. But the point that I want you to remember here is not the exact percentages. What I want you to remember is that a significant portion of the documented avalanche accidents, so these are fatalities and injuries that we've documented over the last several years, significant number of those are directly related to persistent slab avalanches. And that 31% you're seeing there is a combination of deep slabs and more shallow persistent slabs, okay? 34% of those are not documented. So either we couldn't get somebody there or information came back too late and it stormed, whatever it was. So the chances are that's probably a little bit higher, okay? So a lot of people that get hurt with persistent grains as a result. Here's the other thing, same deal. Don't pay attention to the percentage, pay attention to the piece of the pie. They happen all the time, all through the winter, okay? So this isn't just a December thing, this isn't just a January thing, this is every month of the winter season. And it is kind of interesting though, how productive March is. I kind of have to think about that a little bit. So, strong snowpack isn't always the same as a safe snowpack. Persistent problems occur through the winter. It's important because instability lingers after storms, and that, to me, is the trickiest part of persistent problems so far for me in the Northwest, is that in some ways it's actually harder out here. You know, like in southern Idaho, if you bury a surface hoar layer under 2 feet of snow, you know it's going to be there and it's going to be a problem until it gets enough snow on it to make everything slide or squish, okay? Since I've been here in the last 4 years, I don't know how many times one day you can sneeze on a hill and it'll fall down, and the next day you can go kick it 5 times. The structure looks the same to me, but it doesn't want to slide. It's very tricky. So the point here is these things can linger. We're not sure how long. So if you see the structure, you need to get your head in the snow. You need to test it. You need to think about it. And I just got the I'm done sign. Important point is get the forecast. It's our job to pay attention to this stuff, and it's our job to tell you it's out there. It's your job to manage your own risk. Thanks.